Can you
Here we
record?
go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10th reading in this series. Um, as we are all joining in, I'll start with the usual introduction of the embroidery of the week while we settle in. This week, it is actually one that is not one of our studio patterns, but was submitted to us. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. I love the detailing of the shading, but then, of course, the root detail. I thought that was so special. So, this is the embroidery of this week. And I will now share what I'm working on and introduce myself. And so I'm Jen. I use she, her pronouns. And tonight I will be working on the yellow rumped warbler. I'm getting close. Still not there, but I'm getting there. And I have high hopes to have this finished by the end of this year. Um, so I will now pass it over to Ansu.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. I'm calling in from Eagle Rock. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm going to watch the screen because I can't see too good. So I will pass it on to Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm calling in from West Covina, and I also have a crow, but I'll get that during our reading, and then I'll share. And I will pass it on to Jasmine.
Hi, I'm Jasmine and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in Pasquenta tonight in Northern California. And I'm really excited because I received my embroidery kit. So I'm going to start a hermit thrush. And I will pass it to Roxanne.
Hi, I'm Roxanne. I'm calling in from Venice and I use she, her pronouns, and I am going to be mending various moth holes in sweaters. And super excited to be here, and I will pass it to Kavi.
And good evening, everyone. Kavi Law calling in from Sacramento. I use he, him pronouns. And tonight I'll be sharing the screen with really excited. This is the last one for the series, and excited to be with you all for the last couple of weeks. I'll pass you over to Linda.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to be with you all today. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Los Altos in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm still making really slow progress on my mycelium carbon exchange network. And I'm going to pass it along to Trish. I think that she's on the phone this time.
Thanks, Linda. I'm Trish Mulvey. I'm calling in from Palo Alto. I use she, her pronouns. My project is wild white sage that hasn't started yet, but I'm really excited about it. And I will pass it off to Lauren.
Hi, Lauren, using she, they pronouns, calling from Metabolic Studio. I am working on my bee. And happy to be with you all tonight. And I will pass it on to Jasmine. Did Jasmine go already? She did. So pass it on to Ansu. Have you gone? Okay. Sydney?
How about Ola?
Olan.
Hi, I'm Olan and I'm calling from Los Angeles and I'm using she, her pronouns and working on the mycelium carbon exchange. And I don't know if you can see, but I've got some golden threads. Purest gold.
Oh,
And I'll pass it to Sylvia.
Thank
Or-
you. I'm Sylvia Holmes. I'm calling from Pasadena. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm decorating my Christmas tree. And I will pass it to Izzy.
Hi, my name's Izzy. My pronouns are they, she. I'm calling in from Mid-City. And tonight I'm going to be following along the reading. Yeah, no embroidery for me tonight. I will pass it on to Kelly.
Hi guys, she, her, I'm in Echo Park. This is Pip. We will be listening and doing a little side sewing project, but no embroidery today. I will pass it along to Stefano.
Hi everyone, I'm Stefano from El Sereno, and I got my embroidery kit, so I'm gonna start. Yeah, thank you, Jen. I'm gonna start doing this somehow and enjoying the reading. So I'm excited, and I'll pass it on to Roxanne talk.
Actually, I will take it over for right now. Um, as we said, tonight marks the final reading in this series, Tending the Commons, where we have explored how the commons can be an alternative approach to the destructive nature of capitalism, where individual and short-term gains have been prioritized over the common and long-term good. We have asked questions like, what are the commons? What does this look like? How do social relations shift within the commons? And in what ways do the commons resist the simulated scarcity of capitalism? This is the 6th iteration of Learning and Mending, following the syllabi on abolitionist writing, indigenous perspectives of land stewardship, suffocation, Anna Tsing's The Mushroom at the End of the World, and systems thinking. In many ways, this series was a continuation of what preceded it. We've examined alternatives to capitalism and its destructive, corrosive nature in the previous syllabi. But in this series, we specifically looked at the alternative to capitalism, that is, the commons. Many of you have received embroidery kits from us of native plants, birds, and microscopic organisms that the Metabolic Studio is currently cultivating on its project sites. Taken as a collection, all the embroideries will collectively illustrate biogeoconosis, which describes the intimate association between living things and the physical environment. If you've not received an embroidery kit, or you'd like another one, please send your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. It's not too late to request an additional kit, as we will be continuing on with Learning and Mending in the new year. Tonight, we'll share our screen, and we encourage you to read a section of the text aloud with us. When there is a pause in the reading, please feel free to unmute yourself and begin where the last person left off. Silence is golden, and there is no pressure to fill the transitional spaces while we enjoy a breath and continue crafting. Feel free to jump in and continue reading at your comfort level. You don't have to read, it's also fine to enjoy listening. And now I will pass it over to Izzy.
Thank you, Jen. Before we get started with the reading tonight, we're going to do a little breath work. So please find a comfortable position and close your eyes. And take a deep breath in, letting your breath fill you up. Pause at the top of the breath and exhale and release. Take another deep in breath, filling up. Exhale, releasing. Tonight we're reading about dandelions. So imagine that you're holding a dandelion in your hand in front of your face. And the sun is glistening in the dry seeds of the dandelion. The seed is swaying gently to the wind. Take a deep breath in, perhaps make a wish. And as you exhale, blow the dandelion seed with your breath. Visualize the seed flowing through the air, shimmering in the sunlight. Each seed lands softly in a patch of earth, where a new dandelion will blossom and the wind will carry its seeds once more until the world becomes a dandelion patch. Take another deep breath in. Exhale, releasing, softening, letting go. And after the next breath, open your eyes and return to center. So tonight we're reading Eating the Sun, written by Alice McSherry, Paul Moss, and Amba J. Seppi. And it acknowledges a simple reality that our world is only made possible through plants. A retending of our relationships with vegetal life is necessary for survival, but there must also be a shift in ways of knowing and being. Transforming our relationship to plants entails a complete rethinking of the categories of human and plant. And the authors look to the dandelion as a guide to rethinking these relations. Dandelions remind us that our relations with plants are not just as things outside of ourselves, but as life shared within a sentient system, constantly evolving and transforming together. We close out this series on the commons with the following invitation. Like dandelion, may your taproot burrow so deeply into the earth that it is near impossible to extract oneself in entirety. So I will put the glossary in the chat for tonight. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Kavi to begin the reading.
And the dandelion does not stop growing because it is told it's a weed. The dandelion does not care what others see. It says, one day they'll be making wishes upon me. B. Atkinson. Since time immemorial, the human body has coalesced, entangled, and co-evolved with the vegetal body. One of the very first relationships we ever formed as humans on Earth was the one we had and continue to have with plants. Plants are the great oxygen givers of the world, eating sunlight so we can perform that simple yet essential task of life, breathing. They are also the source, directly or indirectly, of all the food we eat, our building materials, the medicines we use to heal, as well as the allies, teachers, guides, and guardians of spirit. To deny we could not survive without the plants would be the demise of our shared humanity. Yet everywhere we look these days, we see this denial in action. Rippling from this denial are extinction rates higher than have ever been seen before. The widespread application of pesticides and herbicides, the corporate control of seed, water, and energy, the perpetual burning of wildfires, and the spread of zoonotic viral pandemics, just to name a few. The list of cascading socio-ecological concerns is as incessant as it is insistent. This era we have aptly named the Anthropocene, the age of the human. But who really is this human we speak of? And indeed, can a human who stands alone, abstracted from our intrinsic relationship with Earth, even be called a human at all? Who are we without the great ones? And in the same breath, who are we and who do we become when we lean into the subtle yet enduring ways that the green ones weave their way through our lives?
There is an Anishinaabe prophecy of the seven fires, which essentially tells us, through story, the epochs of human relationship with Earth. Each epoch is elementally articulated through fire and teaches us, as human people, the value of making wise choices that privilege the ethics of respect, reciprocity, and reverence with Earth. The epoch of the seventh fire puts two options of the journey ahead for humans. One is of a charred, painful path of eternal suffering, and the other describes a soft, green road leading toward a vibrant collective future for humanity. However, the prophecy instructs us that in order to progress down the soft green road, we must turn back to remember and practice the wisdom of all those generations before us. This instruction rests on a deep understanding that the flourishing of life on Earth requires a radical reorientation toward kinship across all species, vegetal. What might this reorientation look like in practice? Active, grounded tending of our relationships with the vegetal may provide some answers. But first, we have to invite other forms of knowing and being onto the scene. Walking the vegetal path engages both a new and very old thinking and praxis. Yet more often than not in this modern world, when we think seriously of communing meaningfully with plants, of actual plant-human and human-plant communication, our minds often drift off to idealized virgin forestscapes, where an intrepid anthropologist lost in the jungle, quote, discovers a new, never before encountered tribe and participates in some sort of ritualistic shamanic ceremony. Or perhaps flashes of Stevie Wonder appear in one's mind, lifted from the 1970s cult classic, The Secret Life of Plants. More often than not, however, the very notion of plant-human communication renders immediate dismissal via an eye roll or shrug. This is because plants, according to a reductionist and westernized worldview, are generally seen as a non-agential, non-sentient backdrop to the central drama of human life on Earth. Plants, it seems, are either not seen at all, or in some cases seen, but only as an exotic other.
Remembering the meaning of being human on Earth means recognizing that plants are beings of power, influence, knowledge, and wisdom. In recent years, scholars such as Matthew Hall, Natasha Myers, and Jeremy Narby have encouraged and cultivated different and more emotionally rich and respectful ways of living with plants. They are prodding us in the West to be not only responsive and responsible for plants' physical and ecological survival, but also to approach them with increased respect and reverence. When we interact with plants with respect, instead of categorizing them as either desirable or undesirable, depending upon our own purposes. We can learn to follow the lead of Gilles Clement and envision our world as a planetary garden, collapsing the anthropocentric divisions of good and bad, and intentionally collaborating with rather than managing against plants and all other non-human living beings. Changing the ways in which we relate to plants is to rethink what both humans and plants really are. This starts with the fact that plants are not inanimate objects, but instead, as told by indigenous elders and now shown in more recent scientific research, such as that conducted by Daniel Chamovitz, Monica Galliano, Stefano Mancuso, Suzanne Simard, Anthony Trehueves, and others, are sensitive and intelligent beings that have bodies and behavior organized in ways that just happen to be different than for us as animals. They move, but just at a much slower pace. They communicate, but often by using a vocabulary of chemical signals that may seem foreign to human senses. They also create sound, but at frequencies humans cannot always hear. Plants from this perspective are as much living expressions of consciousness and presence as we humans are, embodying a shared life force that is sustained through relationship. Recognizing this opens up the possibility for rethinking about the human in a similar way. We think, but not just with our minds. We feel, but not just with our hands. And indeed, we move, but in both overt and subtle ways. There is also a spiritual dimension to our relationship with plants that has spanned many thousands of years. Whether through receiving visions and lessons through ritual use of plants, or by cultivating food and medicine plants, many indigenous and ecologically oriented cultures have nurtured a reverence for spirit through their relationship to plants. Writer and shaman Martin Prechtel speaks to this in his book, The Unlikely Peace at Cuchumaquik, when he describes the seed as mother of all life. Within one seed is the capacity to populate an entire forest, to give life for multitudes in perpetuity. Through plants, we are therefore entangled with an invisible thread that connects all that is living, because quite simply, we are alive and co-evolve in a shared space. When we attune our human senses to the vibrancy of life itself, it is possible not to feel a sense of mystery and reverence. It is impossible not to feel a sense of mystery and reverence pulsating through all bodies of ecology.
This is inherent to understandings of animism as discussed by religious studies scholar Graham Harvey. While animism carries political baggage and has shape-shifted considerably over the last century of anthropological thought, animism is a grounded and accessible pathway for relating to the more than human world in multifaceted, deep ways. This is because in animist sensibility, everything is conscious and thus capable of reciprocal relationship. Communicating, flourishing, and making kin with plants then becomes not only possible, but embedded as a feature of normal awareness, as well as ritualized practice. Sorry, I can't see them. Moreover, reclaiming an animist sensibility axiomatically disrupts dominant, colonizing, reductionist, and materialist worldviews, and allows not only for radical post-human kinship, but also enables a simultaneous process of retrospective healing. Animism can lead to a generative composting of the wastes created by colonization that can help nurture more ecologically oriented indigenous worldviews, therefore advancing decolonization of ourselves as well as the Anthropocene. Anthropologist Jeremy Narby explains in his book, The Cosmic Serpent, how biochemical and medical knowledge is communicated directly to Amazonian shamans by plants themselves. While in Narby's case, the plants in question are the hallucinogenic brew of psychotropic and purgative plants known most commonly known as ayahuasca. This phenomenon is not isolated only to psychoactive plant kin. We are all capable of communicating with plants, provided that we begin to, as Natasha Myers eloquently puts it, vegetalize our sensorium. Rather than limiting the kinds of knowledge, quote unquote, that can be recognized and transmitted, the quest for knowing and being in this world instead becomes intimately bound as part of a dynamic process, a state that has been articulated by the Vietnamese Buddhist monk and philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh as interbeing. That is, because life is in a constant state of relationship, the communication between the vegetal and the human is in and of itself alive and ever changing, emerging from and contributing to real and symbolic architecture of those who are doing the relating, human and plant. Plants can therefore be understood to communicate with humans in a multitude of ways. Ritual, intuitive channeling, song, dreaming, metaphor, and felt sense are but some of the myriad ways through which we can cultivate kinship and embody reciprocal reverence with plants. Think about the old songs held within your own bones. Irrespective of whether or not you are able to create a totally accurate map of your lineage, there are old stories and traditions, ones that span time and place, that invoke the power of plants to our mythic imagination. Plants can help us remember our way home.
For many seasons now, I have watched one companion in particular, who we call Dandelion, grow not only in the garden, but also in the most unlikely of places throughout suburban landscapes, twisting and turning, feeding on sunlight and thriving in some of the most inhospitable places. In spring, Dandelion blooms into an expression of sun through a bright yellow flower, reminding human kin of strength through vitality, yet continuing to remain so deeply grounded in the simple act of living. Have you tried digging a dandelion root out? It is no small feat to keep the whole plant intact. Rather, it remains so steadfast in its connection to source, ready to spread, transform, and tend any brokenness back to life. The tenacity to guard and tend life above all suggests a kind of gentle strength that, when mirrored to the human, reveals the inherent capacity to guard and tend life ourselves. Dandelion shows us how sustenance is held deep within the earth, and so invites us to extend our own metaphorical roots deeper down into the earth, to root in place and thrive despite all odds. There is an implicit sense of transferable strength with Dandelion, an embodiment of the Seven Fires prophecy that we must alchemize the past into the future, opting for depth over distance. Yet somehow, we have waged a war on Dandelion in recent years, relegating Dandelion to the realm of weed and therefore an unwanted member of our earth community. The knowledge of our paradoxical relationship flows through me, and so I slow down, I quiet my mind, and I observe. From observation, I turn to action, participating in relationship with Dandelion with all my senses. From an herbalist's perspective, Dandelion is of particular support to the liver, gently aiding our body's processing center to filter our human system. As I place a fresh leaf in my mouth, I notice the bitterness as the juices flow across my tongue. Bitter and astringent herbs cause a drying sensation, not just in my mouth, but throughout my body. I feel lighter almost immediately, not literally in terms of actual weight, but instead figuratively, as if weight has been lifted off my shoulders. What just moved within me in that moment of intimacy with Dandelion?
Dandelion's capacity to aid in process have been known to humans for a long time. In fact, dandelion was recorded in the mid-15th century folk herbal book Les Evangiles de Quinoles, the Distaff Gospels, as pissenlit, the literal translation from French to mean piss the bed. This is thanks to the diuretic quality of dandelion leaves, removing excess water from the body and therefore stimulating bile production in the gallbladder. In a similar vein, dandelion, or pugong yin, as it is known in traditional Chinese medicine, is a cooling herb and said to temper excess stomach fire and detoxify the body back into a state of balance. Each modality, while appearing divergent in specific applications, all point to a particular essence that dandelion brings forth, that of cooling, detoxifying, tempering, transmuting. All these qualities are verbs that privilege attention to process over outcome and the inherent strength that emerges through honoring process. In my mind, I hear an incessant chant. Try as you may, you can't stop me. I was made to survive. Suddenly, that metaphorical weight that I felt earlier is rendered real. The psychological and physical messages entwine in my own instrument of perception, my body, in a perfectly dandelion-specific way.
Such modes of knowing with plants are sometimes termed as intuitive plant medicine. Here, we explicitly bring attention to intuition, here not to displace the role of intellect, but rather to trouble conventionally westernized definitions and expand what is meant by the mind. If all bodies of ecology are indeed alive and sentient expressions of Gaia, then it is at this very moment of energy, this very movement of energy through and between these bodies that sustain life itself. This life force can be conceptualized in many different ways, as breath or as spirit, and can be manifested differently for and within each body. Discussing and bringing spirit into the equation is, however, troubling for the modern anthropocenic mind, thanks to the self-serving co-option of spirit by institutionalized religion. In order to take human and human-plant communication seriously, we must challenge and transform anthropocentric framings so that spirit is understood as an inherent and embedded aspect of life itself. This means that spirit does not simply exist intangibly, but can be and is experienced in embodied material ways through practice. Spirit, in this sense, is an expression of sentience and relationality. And to take seriously spirit in practice is in many ways the practice of tending relationship with a more than human world. As Australian eco-philosopher Deborah Bird Rose writes, to live in a world of sentience is to be surrounded by others who are sentient, in which only some of whom are human. Opening ourselves up to experiencing direct communication and embodied being with plants is therefore an exercise of extending our preconceived ideas of what a person actually means, and then honing one's sensorial facilities to to stretch our capacity for knowing beyond the human scale and reconnect with what David Abram terms the many-voiced landscape. Humans are hardwired to engage with plants. The issue here is simply that we, as humans, have been conditioned out of engaging with the vegetal world in an intuitively attentive, multisensorial manner. To remember this knowing and actively practice these ways of knowing is to practice the restoring of the Anthropocene. Like dandelion, may your taproot burrow so deeply into the earth that it is nearly impossible to extract oneself in entirety. And that ends our reading for this week. And before diving into discussion, wanted to spend a little bit of time diving a little deeper into dandelions. In preparing for this week's readings, Izzy, Emily, Jen, and I wondered about the origins of the myth of wishing on dandelions and coming to this kind of the source of that, and did a little bit of digging over the week and trying to look into that question, and unfortunately didn't come to a real answer about this. It's kind of lost to history in a way, or just kind of a folkloric thing that has been passed down without its complete origin. But what I did find is that it may have started from another superstition that if you blow all the seeds of a dandelion at once, the person you loved will love you back. And if the seeds remained, you may have some problems there. You may want to reconsider that. My guess is, personally, I think it's similar to the way that we were told to make a wish when you blow out your birthday candles. The dandelion seeds floating away look similar to smoke on a recently extinguished candle. Or could it be just pure fun? Or maybe just co-evolution? Dandelion seed puffs are irresistible, so puffy and attractive, begging you to blow it. Maybe the plant adapted and thrived because of our curiosity. It's a plant of wonder and whimsy, drawing us to pluck and spread its seeds across the land. And it had some quick dandelion facts here. Each time you wish upon a dandelion and blow its seeds, you are sending anywhere from 54 to 172 seeds into the air. Each seed is viable up to 5 years, and if the seed takes root, the plant can live up to 13 years. The 3 phases of a dandelion are said to represent the sun, moon, and stars. The yellow flower represents the sun, of course. The white puffball represents the moon, and the dispersing seeds represent the stars. Another couple facts, lastly, is that the pollen and nectar from dandelions are vital to early spring pollinators. And unfortunately, they've been regarded as a backyard weed and exterminated, like the text mentioned as well. And these are very early sources for bees that emerge from the winter, and really one of those scarce sources of food that are really needed in early spring. And they're also used to tell the time and even the weather. The yellow leaves the yellow flowers open up from the ball at dusk, and at dawn close back up again. And the dandelions, once if they're sensing rain and kind of use as a barometric meter, they'll actually fold itself back into itself again and remain closed before rain. So a little fun kind of detour into dandelions, but I'll pass it over to you, Izzy.
Thank you, Kavi. That's a really fun detour. I like the mythology of if you blow them all out, the person who you love will love you back. I always thought you could just make any wish, but who knows? Okay, well, tonight, before we begin discussion, because this is the last session of this particular series, I want to trace back through the material, reviewing some of the main points and how we moved through the ideas. So in week 1, we read Insurrectionary Agriculture Milieu by Michael Luong, a zine about emancipatory farming practices, particularly in Hong Kong, and how these indefinite sites of resistance become heterotopias that gather people from multidisciplinary backgrounds in different communities. And this text immediately opened us up to thinking about the commons as often necessitating a legality through multiple outlets. But it also set the stage up for the commons as a material struggle between people, but also between people and the more than human world in this context through agriculture, which brought us to our next text, Trees, More Than Human Collectives by Bojana Pisker. And with this text, we challenged the boundary between humans and non-human species, looking at trees and the mycorrhizal network as guides for our commoning practices. We also challenged the human, non-human categorization in our reading of Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu by Donna Haraway. With Haraway, we thought about what it means to make kin and think with more than human species. These notions of making kin and thinking with that came up in several other texts we read, particularly the text the next 2 weeks, which was Matters of Care, Speculative Ethics in More Than Human Worlds by Maria Puig de la Bellacasa. And with Matters of Care, we read about webs of relations and how our existence is mediated through relationships. One of the webs that Puig de la Bellacasa looks at particularly is the complex world of soil and how we're not outside of that world. Positioning us from within soil, we are brought into a polyphonic assemblage of different rhythms and time scales. This reading challenged linear orientation of time and invited us into a questioning of what the temporal landscapes of commons might be. The following week, we took the question of organization of the commons one step further with Re-Enchanting the World, Feminism and the Politics of the Commons by Silvia Federici. In the chapter we read, Federici co-authored with George Kafantzis, and they provided us with 9 criteria for the commons. And a few important takeaways were that the commons are not just a sharing of material resources, but that they demand a shift in social relations, particularly towards horizontal relations sustained by community. And the following week, we read Reclaiming the Commons by Vandana Shiva, who's often in conversation with Federici as they share similar ideas and engage in dialogue together. But with this text, we talked specifically about seed and the immense commons of knowledge that are held in a single seed, and how the knowledge of the commons and seed are enclosed through intellectual property rights and biopiracy. And this enclosure, as many are targeted specifically towards Indigenous commons, which then brought us to our next text. The following week, we read an essay, Standing Rock and the Indigenous Commons by Dorothy Kidd. And this was an important piece for us to read because it provided a critique of the commons that deepened our discussion formulation of it, that not all commons are worth protecting, and some actually reinstate and kind of reenact particular enclosures and just like racist patterns of enclosure. And so we talked about how Indigenous land-based direct action is crucial to the reclamation of the commons, and what reclaiming the commons means in the framework of a refugee crisis was brought to the forefront last week through the essay, The Scale of the Commons and Solidarity Infrastructures by Palin Tan. We looked at the Athens City Plaza squat, the hotel refugee squat, and discussed squatting as a core principle of commoning. And here again, just like the insurrectionary agriculture milieu, we're reminded about how creating the commons often demands an element of illegality. And the City Plaza squat was a practical model for commons and thinking about how self-organization and autonomy of squatters' community can reveal the power of collective action that arises out of solidarity infrastructure. And this week we read Eating the Sun, and over the arc of the syllabus, we discussed many worlds in relation to the notion of the commons. And what this final text reminded us of is the interconnectivity of all these different worlds and how each world is almost situated within another. And they're all connected through a mycorrhizal network of sorts. And these worlds, as the text highlights, are both material and spiritual. And the struggle for the commons is rooted in real relations, material relations, but also relations that extend into the realm of immateriality. I think eating the sun is an apt metaphor for the entangled web we're situated in. And it's only by first recognizing this web of material struggle that we're situated within and recognizing that we're part of it and it's part of us that we may begin to shift our world back toward the commons. So this week, I don't have a particular set of questions, rather just reflection on what we talked about throughout the series, what we worked through. So for discussion tonight, please feel free to reflect on any aspect of the series, tonight's text in particular, or if you feel inclined to pose a question. Yeah, I open up the floor to you all.
Izzy, the glossary that you put together is like so outstanding. It's so great.
Thank you.
Because it really anchors all the key things of the thread that you just went through. It's really cool.
Thank you. It was really fun to make each week.
Yeah, it's just been such an epic journey, and I want to thank you, Lauren, and you, Izzy, and Jen, and Cindy, and Kavi for carrying this beautiful series along. And I appreciated that kind of conceptual recap of like what you saw as the core element of each kind of piece of this journey and this story. And yeah, it's just miraculous. And I love this series. I love this gentle, supportive space that feels like, this kind of collective therapy in some way. There are not that many things from the time of the pandemic or the quarantine that I hold on to and think of as like, this is something that I would like to keep going in another chapter of the world. But this is like something that's become just a very beautiful space that I love to be in and participate in and support. So that comes to mind. And then specifically the text tonight, I just love this perspective of kind of decentralizing the human in the time of Anthropocene, like, and uplifting the kind of energy and point of view, if you want to call it that, of the dandelion. I just find it like so rich and sensual and beautiful. And this idea of eating the sun, it's definitely my favorite title of all the pieces that we've read. There's something just so visceral about it. And I think it's a very powerful text for uplifting an idea of planthood, or uplifting a point of view of what it's like to be a plant. And one kind of offshooting connection that just came into my mind is, a lot of the work that I do with the Metabolic Studio has to do with documentation and video of living systems in various contexts and being a witness to climate. And through looking at hours and hours of documentation of plants that we've collected over time, I've often thought, well, part of the value of this material is that I empathize with the plant when I see it super up close, when I see the hairs on a plant, or I see a tiny insect coming across it. And maybe that's part of what resonates so deeply for me about this text, is to shift the perspective and say, well, what is it actually like to be a plant on planet Earth instead of just a human? So I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks everyone here for being a part of this.
I loved what you said, Emily, about few things in the pandemic being things that you want to see continue. And I definitely feel the same way about this group. And I think that the opportunity to share both the grief of what we all lost during these strange months and at the same time explore new opportunities to dive into these wonderful texts in a collective setting and discover new things and connect and relate to each other and to the thinking of the authors that we're reading. It's been really a joy and something that I cherish. So thanks to everyone for being here and being part of this strange time we're living through.
Well, I think this series in particular, I read so much text that is so critical of the catastrophe, the slow moving or fast catastrophe that we're in the middle of. And here comes all of these thinkers from all different contexts. Amba Sipi, I had encountered her before in her thesis about tracing the mother line. That was a fantastic text, and her name just jogged my memory. So all these amazing writers from everywhere, and they all seem to have this theme was very hopeful, and this theme was definitely about deepening our caricaturized definition of what it means to be a human being, this very restricted and shrunk and mechanized and limited view of what it means to be human. And of all the progress that we've made over the centuries, it makes me think, when we read about animism and things like that, what have we lost over the centuries from the heritage of humanity, that our closeness with the non-human world. So I like the thing that I liked the most that I picked up, I think maybe everybody's been touched by it, is just how to become a deeper human being on this planet and walk the walk with a different diameter around you, with a different porous boundary, so that you're not just a human being, because we're not human beings if we don't have clouds and trees and grass underfoot, and we don't get that message enough. Our rhetorical world is just full of mechanical and artifice, not nature. And so this series was very hopeful for me in that way.
I think something that was really fun for me with this series, but also challenging, was how loosely understood the category of the commons can be and what the commons really means. It can mean multiple things at once, at the same time, and looking at the different ways that we're situated within a commons that is just natural to our being. Like there are some components of the commons that we, no matter how far we fall into anthropocentric kinds of thinking or existing, we can't escape the commons, but also how there are ways to activate the commons, and whether that be the commons we share with non-humans, but also the commons that we share with each other. And it was fun to look at the different angles of the commons, whether that be politically, like organized commons of resistance, sites of resistance that are intentionally like resisting the enclosure, but also commons that like a patch of trees, or a patch of dandelions, or the soil, the complex web of the soil that you can see like how we interact with and are situated within, and to look at those different levels and see how they interact with each other, but also exist as like autonomous sites of commoning. I really enjoyed all those different levels of exploration.
I had some reflection, not about the text, but I think kind of thinking more broadly about the commons as well. And recently, the news about the James Webb Telescope and how really exciting that is, but also just kind of thinking about the night sky in general, about the kind of the stars and planets and galaxies that are visible to all beings across the earth at any given time, or well, as long as it's dark there. But it's something that kind of links us, like in a way we're watching the movement of the sun, and anybody else that's looking at it at the same time is connected by just their gaze, and in a way that's also kind of connected back in time to the night sky. Might have looked very similar to what it is today, like 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But those kind of particles of light that have been traveling are certainly much more different than they were back then. And now kind of thinking about this news of the telescope and kind of exploring the origins of our universe, that the ways that thinking about how much more that our skies have changed too, because of satellites and introduction of like Starlink, the SpaceX Starlink satellites, or you can see the trails of light across the night sky, and a lot more that we're introducing onto our orbit. And it just makes me think of kind of like, our Earth and our land on the ground has changed so much in the past several thousands of years, but our sky has remained almost unchanged. And now with launching these satellites and kind of destroying that, in a way, not destroying, but in a way, the constellations and everything we see in the sky have led to myths, creation stories, and origins of our own. And now you're kind of drifting away from that, kind of creating a different skyscape, so to speak. And just thinking more about the ways that we need to protect that, especially from the light pollution and other ways. But it's one of those things that I think bind us all, but in a way that we take for granted far too often too.
I just, you going, Lauren? Go ahead.
There you go.
I just want to appreciate you, Lauren, actually, and all of you for this amazing community of, I know just a handful of you from other places than this Zoom, but the commitment to the sort of whole systems of whole systems and integration of intellect and science and activism and empathy and love and beauty and commitment to fierce uncovering is quite astounding. That's been happening. And I've been working the last 2 Thursdays and missed you all, but it's just really it gives me great hope that folks are doing this. And there's a couple of other communities that I'm part of that are doing different versions more related to activism and healing specifically, but this is sort of the most synergistic experience I've had with what's actually going on in front of us and using what we know from behind us. And what it's just really, really, really profoundly lovely and beautiful and enriching. And I've been honored to be here. So thank you.
So nice to have you with us, Laura. Well, I just wanted to say, Izzy, wow.
Thanks.
I really don't even really know what to say. I mean, you're just astounding. I just love listening to you and your fluency with really complicated ideas. It's like every single time you go on a magic carpet ride.
Thank
I'm not
you.
even sure exactly. I don't think I could repeat anything that you told me at all. But I think it washed over me in such a wonderful way. And just thank you for being. You make me feel hopeful about the universe.
Thank you.
You're
Really
a
sweet.
dandelion. You're a pollinator. You're a pollinator of big ideas and with the ability to curate delicacy and wonder and see it. And I just really appreciate it. And I'm thankful that you're part of this community. So that's really all I had to say. But I did want to follow the thread of wonder here a minute and just say that closing out on this reading made me think about how dandelions are for me a bit like amazing circus creatures in that they kind of mediate between the earth and sky. And like you look at them on the ground, but then all of a sudden they're aloft, floating in the air. And that sense of wonder that a field of dandelions brings, it's kind of that thing that makes you see that Gaia connection between the crust of the earth and the atmosphere. And yet the dandelion root is one of these things that for many, many, many cultures is so healing and curative. So the idea that that there's something that's so grounded and rooted and earthy, where there's this incredibly playful, connective seed ball flying through the air, and then there's these tap roots that are digging deep into the ground and make themselves available to us to soak in waters that we drink that bring like the healing power of the earth into our bodies. And that's known colloquially for so many generations as medicine is also really wonderful. And it makes me think about the kind of miracle this reading brings up of photosynthesis, you know, that the idea that that sun creates the possibility for plants to give us oxygen, and through that oxygen for us to be, is kind of where that interconnectedness kind of begins, and where the interconnectedness and the commons interface is through these social organisms that you've curated for us to think about. And last week's reading Palantan, reading about the squat and the kind of challenge about whether designers of buildings in the built environment could like the possibility of squatting as a brief for design. It and kind of in a way manifests that kind of edge between the commons and interdependence, you know, like interdependence is the truth of life, and the commons is what we can model, I think, from that truth. So that's what the last kind of 2 weeks got to me.
Yeah, your description of the dandelion is making me think of rhythm and the way and temporality and the kinds of ways that the dandelion is existing in multiple spheres at once and has the ability to be in multiple places at the same time through the air, and how sound has played a part, how rhythm and sound has played a part in this series, through Emily's wonderful contribution. And yeah, thinking about like what the comments sound like and what the rhythm of the comments might be, and the way that the temporalities coalesce, I think has been another cool through line throughout the series. So thank you for that, Emily, also.
And yeah, I think I have to jump back in on the Emily front too and say another, oh, wow. Emily.
Thank you.
I mean, to take Izzy's prompts and to create pure and unadulterated being in the moment without it being it's obviously designed and premeditated, but it's like being in a live performance situation with you. Your understanding of the camera, your understanding of how to communicate visually as well as sonically over the Zoom platform and bring, interpretation of these texts to us was truly spectacular. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing. Such a joy and a pleasure.
And the flyer art too.
I probably, this is a very particular point, and I absolutely want to echo Lauren's words about the construction of the series as a sort of whole of body experience for us sitting in our living rooms and behind a computer. But it's so cool how this particular piece corrects the rather sad sort of modern idea that the only accessible spirituality or connection to plants that's not sort of dissecting them or utilizing them is to use the plants as a sort of an intentional, like, purgatory and hallucinatory agent. And this text, said, well, that's one aspect of it, but there's the entire spectrum of intuitive reasoning, of hope, of all the entire aspect of being human in relation to that plant, and that relationship was drawn out. Whereas I think in the modern world, there's just this horrible reductionist idea of which plants you can get a sort of a spiritual trip out of or something like that. And this went way beyond that. So kudos to this piece. I think I'm going to reread and reuse this piece because I feel like I have great relationships with, seeds and trees, and I just feel like weeping every time I'm around a big tree. And this piece sort of just gave voice to that, which is very validating.
Yeah, it's always really nice to read a piece that so eloquently bridges the scientific and the spiritual and finds kind of like a point of bridges the two in a way that doesn't feel like too ridiculous in either direction, but is just showing how conceptions of life, whether that be through a scientific lens, quote unquote, or a spiritual lens, don't have to be that far apart, and can reveal more about the power of interconnectivity between all living and non-living forms of matter.
Yeah, what I love about so many of the readings in this series, including tonight's, is the way that they, I feel, explain some of my own behaviors throughout the pandemic. You know, the wonderful readings about companionship with dogs and other species. And then tonight's reading, as you said, Izzy, that intersects the spiritual and the scientific. As someone who talks to my plants, I feel sort of vindicated by a piece like this, in terms of what Anzu also said, the emotional connectivity that we share with other species, and to see that recognized in a public forum and in the readings leaves me with a profound sense of connection and recognition that I'm grateful for.
But Rowena as well, I want to just say how suppressed and oppressed we have been by the rhetorical power of Western science, which is a specific tradition that has just sort of sliced off anything that is not measurable and quantifiable and tangible and empirical and observable, and made that into a non-entity. And that's a terrible legacy, and a very narrow-minded legacy. And to recover from that sort of materiality, the oppression of the materiality, is almost like therapy, you know, to allow this non-manifest, quote unquote, spiritual side of the world that was so fluid before the scientific revolution for humanity, was so fluidly accessible. Now we almost feel guilty to even acknowledge that aspect of ourselves. And so this new, I'm going to call this new science, because they're breaking through really the limitations of this very shallowly defined empiricism that science became, and reaching for different kinds of language is a tremendous lift.
Yeah, no, I feel like we're collectively recovering from the Enlightenment, which was colonialist, patriarchal, hierarchical, and reductionist. And I think that there's so many more enriching ways to experience the world and our role and our place in the web of life that we miss out on when we buy into that dominant way of thinking. So I think this group has provided such relief and camaraderie in both the texts and the company. So thank you.
For further reading on this subject, I dropped a really good book in the chat bar, so you should download it and check it out. It's called Mind in the Cosmos by Thomas Nagel, and it's about bridging the gap between science and consciousness, and resisting the reductionist methods of science that don't leave any space for consciousness or relegate consciousness to this like weird zone of nothing. It's a really good book.
Thank you, Izzy. So it looks like a great book. I mean, and considering that really there's no language in science that is sufficient to fully, I mean, it's still called the great problem of human consciousness because
Yeah.
they just don't have language to understand something as enigmatic, as efficient, that it does 10 same organ, the same pattern can do 10 different things in 10 different contexts. Human consciousness is our way of knowing the world, and to carve that out so separately to then caricaturize the world, I mean, as Verena correctly said, it's a long recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, which reminds me of our reading of Shiva and the ways in which science, the scientific language, doesn't create space to talk about these things whatsoever, or not even just scientific language, but this like language that's been reduced and produced within a capitalist worldview, and how the commons must and inherently does push back against that and develops a new language of sometimes like thinking about the ways that plants communicate through chemicals or through like sending signals in the mycorrhizal network, like other ways of communication that traverse the bounds of language, and allow us to expand beyond that and connect with others. And yeah, it's a lot.
It is. And this particular text, you know, it mentioned dreams and the role of intuition and things like that, which I think bridges the world of human consciousness and the capacity of our consciousness to touch other more than human life in a way that's never encapsulated by the limitations of science. So really excited for this book. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, in a few minutes, I think we'll get started with Emily's sound. Does anyone have any last things to share before we begin the sound piece?
Well, I'll just say that we'll be starting up again with the 7th iteration of Learning in Mending on Thursday, January 20th, Jen?
20th. Yep.
20th. The same week as Martin Luther King's birthday, we'll be doing another syllabus on abolitionist women writers, which is where we started. It's a reworking of our first one, but this time the revision is being done by a friend of Izzy's named Jasper. And they are currently refining that syllabus, and we're really excited about that, and especially with the death yesterday of Bell Hooks, it seems like the there we go. That the yeah,
go ahead.
That it's a good time to be digging deep into that. And of course, with all of these syllabi that we're putting together, the idea is that the studio's also collecting syllabi for the Commons. So part of the connection to the Commons is that we now have these syllabi which we can continue to rework and recultivate in the public sphere as a community collection and inquiry and conversation that is open sourced and available to anybody as long as they can get on a Zoom. So part of that is now kind of going back to certain themes and reworking them to test and work with that idea that because we're not working with professional teachers necessarily, but more inspired thinkers to put together syllabi that connect to this idea that learning and mending is required of all of us, no matter what our level of expertise is. We're all required to dig deeply into this moment and try and participate in learning and mending together. But to really test that out is kind of going back to the syllabi and reworking them and discussing them again. So this will be the first syllabus that we're reworking. So I hope you all come back and tell your friends to join in. It'll be another 10-week series beginning on the 20th of January.
Oh, I love that. It's so funny because I was just thinking about when folks were talking about science versus consciousness and these comparisons of, I was thinking about Patrice's words around everything comes down to love, and I was going to read this bell hooks. I'm sure y'all have been reading bell hooks all day long, but the time has come to tell the truth again. There is no love without justice. If we remain unable to imagine a world where love can be recognized as a unifying principle that can lead us to seek and use power wisely, then we will remain wedded to a culture of domination that requires us to choose power over love. And then this poster that you've been seeing, the transformative power of love is the foundation of all meaningful social change. There she is. There we go. Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Thanks, Laura, for sharing that. And thank you, Lauren, for making this series possible. It's been a real pleasure to take part in, and I'm excited for this next upcoming series. It's a really important conversation to be had, so I'm looking forward to it. And with that, should we get started with Emily? Is everyone ready to hear some awesome sounds? Yeah, okay, cool. Take it away, Em. That was really beautiful. Thank you, Emily. And thanks, everyone. See you all in January.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Bye.
Night. Great to be with you.